That's what it is called. No, no, it's. I'm sorry. I'm doing this. I'm gonna be occupied next hour.
Yeah, I got a new charger.
So right now I'm frustrated because we don't have a single one of the experts in. Well, the panel starts in 12 minutes. None of them are there yet. One of them canceled. I've been working hard to get a sub, but the two that are supposed to be there aren't there. So. Hi,
Hi.
Lisa. I'm just
Hi.
tracking down one of your colleagues on the plenary here, and I'll be back with you in a moment. We have had one problem, which is that one person, David Leopold, had a client emergency this morning because a client of him got arrested and is dealing with immediate deportation issues. So he
Okay.
is unfortunately not going to be available. That may mean that you're going to end up having a disproportionate share of questions this afternoon, but I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. I think David and I have similar practice areas. So,
Excellent.
how many more weeks of this?
We're probably at the conclusion of the data collection, assuming we get everyone to fill in the surveys appropriately, but then there'll be the publication of some of the results, and then there'll be video clips that will be subsequently released. But that'll take some more editing. We should have quantitative results this week from the pre and post and the control group. We've already had hundreds of responses on the control group and are securing the rest of the treatment group as we speak.
Hmm. Cool. It's a very cool project.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm really grateful for all your help on it. I think it's very fortunate that we found your help.
You need to launch this into the sphere of men and women relationships. See if this model
Uh,
works in discussing gender issues.
well, I think it's interesting. There have been studies that we've done that in some deliberative polls we've counted how many minutes the men and women speak and found that
Hmm.
we've been able to get them to roughly 50-50 if the
Hmm.
moderators are trained appropriately.
Hmm.
So that is striking. I think there's also been, we've used it on family planning issues in Uganda, and
Oh
they've
wow.
had significant shift towards increased openness to family planning by people who have more than 15 children who have shifted their attitude on that consideration, which is sort of an interesting capacity. Um,
Hmm. I'd like to
yeah,
talk to you
no,
more about this in other areas like application on human rights, some other human rights issues. That would be very interesting if you've had positive results on like family planning.
we've had also among Catholics and Protestants that. But here, let me say we should let's. not do more pre-chat because we just got the first live viewers, so let's hold off for a minute, and I'd be happy to speak to you about that offline. Um, Let me just take a moment, and we'll be starting here in a few minutes. I just want to make sure to grab a tool here. We'll get started in just 2 or 3 minutes here. But Good afternoon, you all. This is the ReframeIt TechCrunch Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Knight Foundation, national online dialogue within the technology community about immigration reform. We have with us today Lisa Johnson Firth, who is an expert on immigration policy. Lisa Johnson Firth is the principal of Immigration Firths, an immigration and human rights law firm. She specializes in removal, defense, asylum, UNT visas, naturalization, Convention Against Torture claims, Violence Against Women Act petitions. Ms. Johnson Firth also serves as adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center, where she focuses on immigrant women and human rights. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa.
Thank you.
Um, Also, we were originally scheduled today to have David Leopold as founder and principal of David Leopold Wolf at Wolf Leopold and Associates, where he specializes in matters of immigration, visas, and citizenship. His work focuses on representation of healthcare institutions and physicians, deportation, defense, and federal immigration litigation. He is an advocate for immigration reform and has served as president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Unfortunately, David had an emergency situation with a client today who was dealing with arrest and deportation issues, and so he will not be able to join us in person today, unfortunately. Although I think there will be extensive expertise that Lisa will be bringing to us today to be able to respond to questions that might have also been relevant to his areas of interest and expertise. I believe we will also have one more plenary participant, Atul Singh, who is the founder of Fair Observer, also joining us. I'll do a formal introduction of him should he join a little later in the program. But let me begin, because we have a lot of questions here from the groups, by beginning to give Lisa a chance to begin addressing those. Thank you again so much, Lisa, for your participation in this plenary and prior plenaries. We're also grateful for all the technology community members who've taken time out of their weekend to join in this national dialogue. In Julie's group, there was a question of why is it the case and how has it happened that before any immigration reform can occur, politicians are requiring increased border protections, e.g. National Guard troops, more agents, more fencing, given the agents, perhaps greater than 10 per mile, and the dramatic decrease in illegal border crossings in the last few years. Let me combine also the second question, which was related. What deterrents do other countries use for border protection that the U.S. doesn't currently use but could consider?
Well,
Um,
just to start right off, I don't have a lot of knowledge about other countries' border protection. I guess I'm sort of the most familiar with Australia, who takes a more aggressive stand on undocumented people crossing the border, but in some ways, well, they are an island nation. They occupy their entire border is the ocean, and so they're able to apprehend people more easily. So that's really the only country I know about, except maybe Spain and Morocco. Countries like Spain, who are bordering African countries, have also been very rigid about their border control, have imprisoned large numbers of populations with very little consideration to the human rights issues, as far as I could tell, but I don't have intimate knowledge on other countries' border situations. In terms of the trade-off between finding a sort of an amnesty solution, which comprehensive immigration reform was proposing, and more border patrol in the United States, I could guess a couple of things. I haven't sat in on those congressional hearings, but one is just sheerly political, which is pretty obvious that if we're going to grant an amnesty, there's going to be a trade-off on the other side that we want to enforce the border to make sure that there's not another whole population 10 years from now that we have to give another amnesty to. And so I think people want that balance, that if we're going to give something, we're going to make sure that our borders are strengthened at the same time. I don't think you can underestimate still the concern about terrorism or people coming into the United States that could cause harm. We are bordering incredibly violent countries. Maybe not so much Mexico, although even Mexico is becoming increasingly horrifically violent, particularly on the border, with Las Zetas as one of the known gangs down there that decapitates people and tortures people. And so, although it may seem further removed from us, El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras, which has the worst problems, I think those problems are creeping across. And although I'm not as border enforcement as maybe some people are, I do myself have a lot of concerns about the violence that we're seeing in these gangs. I handle gang-based cases every single day, and they are truly horrific. And it's no surprise to me that we have 60,000 kids at the border fleeing gang violence. I think that addressed most of the question. Was there a part that I missed?
Well, I think that there was a question of politicians are requiring increased border protection, and then the second part of the question was given the high density of agents. So I guess is there any comment about that side of things? Of that the question flagged that there's proposed increases in National Guard and agents and fencing, and this was identified in the context of the statement that there was a high density of current agents.
Well, that's true, but I don't think from what we've seen over the summer with 60,000 kids at the border that arguably we don't have enough agents now. So I think I addressed the border enforcement that, the United States isn't prepared to keep offering amnesties every 10 years, which if they did it again, it would be about every 10 years that we've fallen into this pattern of, oh gosh, we have now 11 million undocumented people in the United States. What are we going to do with all these people that are really second-class citizens? Well, we've got to offer them something, so we offer them a green card program, which then leads to citizenship. So aside from that issue, it doesn't appear to me that there are enough agents. I mean, the prisons, the agents are overwhelmed at the border. When I call down to Texas and Arizona, I can't get a hold of officers. I've got clients down in those states that I can't reach because there's not enough agents to answer the phones and handle, all the administrative work in the prisons.
Thank you for responding. That's helpful in addressing both of those questions. Let me turn to the next question. Of Haley's group asked, how can we promote the health of the community if unauthorized immigrants are excluded from preventative services such as Medicare and law enforcement protection for fear of deportation?
So there's two parts to that question. One is, it seems like the person who posed the group that posed the question is interested in healthcare for undocumented immigrants. Is that right?
And then let me read it one more time. How can we promote the health of the community if unauthorized immigrants are excluded from preventative services such as Medicare and law enforcement protection for fear of deportation?
Okay, I'm not really sure I understand the law enforcement connection except in the emotional health of the community, so I guess I'll address it from that perspective. Unless I'm missing something. But in terms of the medical care, currently undocumented immigrants do not have a lot of access to medical programs, and I'm not an expert on this part of it, but they certainly don't qualify for Medicaid or Medicare. Their children, their U.S. citizen children do. However, that said, they still use local hospitals. And in the area that I live in Prince William County, Virginia, one of the biggest complaints when Prince William was cracking down on the undocumented community here, because we were sort of the forerunner to the SB 1070 law in Arizona, one of the main arguments for wanting undocumented persons out of our community was the cost of health care. That women were getting pregnant, they were going to emergency rooms for prenatal care, which cost a vast amount of money in terms of taking care of them, they would have their babies with no medical insurance, so the hospitals were really eating those costs, and that was one of the larger complaints. And although I've seen a number of studies that talk about the favorable aspects that an immigrant community brings to a country, and that, for instance, Council on Foreign Relations had a report that said there was a 1% positive effect of having a good migration flow into the United States. I think healthcare, and again, you'd probably need to talk to a policy person about this, but I think healthcare might be the exception to that healthcare costs are so vastly expensive, and have people who are undocumented taking, I don't know, partaking of that system is extraordinarily expensive for all of us.
I think that terrifically answers the first part of the question. Let me just frame the second part of the question, which was, are unauthorized immigrants excluded from law enforcement protection for fear of deportation?
So, I'm sorry, is the question, are they excluded? What's the second part?
I think it's a question of if they are excluded, or are they excluded, and would that have a consequence for the health of the community? I'm taking the question to mean to the degree to which they're excluded from law enforcement protection due to fear of deportation, the way it's worded.
Okay, I'm still. Can you just rephrase it? Because I'm really not tracking that question. I'm not sure
Okay,
if it's the health.
It's more. I think they were just asking about whether. Well, let me not interpret too much. Let me go to the next question, because
Okay.
we can come back to it. Why isn't the E-Verify system used nationwide? This is the third question of the first group.
Yeah, I think we've addressed the E-Verify in a lot of different ways throughout these panels. And, one of the issues is that employment law is governed both by state and federal law. We have the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's a federal law that sort of guarantees minimum protection in the workplace, but yet a tremendous amount of employment law is governed by state law. And just the employment contract itself is a state law governed document and relationship. And so states have the autonomy at the moment to decide whether they want to comply with E-Verify. And some states that view themselves as more, quote, business friendly may not choose to partake in the E-Verify system because it has not in the past been as efficient as it could have been. There were some mistakes and problems and glitches in the software when the program was getting up and running, and it is an administrative hassle. I myself have gone through the E-Verify system, sort of checking it out on behalf of some clients, and I don't know if I would willingly want to participate in it myself if I was an employer that needed to look at that issue. And you can't mistake the obvious that employers benefit from hiring undocumented workers. So if you're a restaurant and all of your staff are undocumented, and you can get away with paying them very little money and not having them be able to fight for their rights in terms of employment, then it's better for the employer. So that's certainly a clear reason why they wouldn't want to comply with E-Verify. On the positive side of whether they would want to and states would want to is that it does not, I don't know if at the moment there's federal funding incentive for states to comply with E-Verify, but I know in terms of other parts of the immigration law, when states are compliant, like secure communities, that they do get a benefit in terms of they continue to receive federal funding that they may not otherwise receive if they did away with secure communities, for instance. So I think there's a benefit that way for the states, but some choose not to do it because they get more benefit from the business community.
Excellent. Thank you so much for addressing that. Let me turn to Haley's group number 2, the second question that was asked. So much of our debate over immigration policy and enforcement comes down to questions of shared values and their relative priority. Separate from specifics of policy, is anyone at the national level taking on helping citizens and politicians hear from one another about values? For example, fairness, openness, equality, universal education. Let me repeat this question. So much of our debate about immigration policy and enforcement comes down to questions of shared values and their relative priority. Separate from specifics of policy, is anyone at the national level taking on helping citizens and politicians hear from one another about values? For example, fairness, openness, equality, universal education.
Okay, that's a big question. I don't know of a national leader per se that's doing this, but it's certainly in the news. And your group is an example of a group that is creating debate and conversation around immigration policy. In the DC area, where we have a lot of think tanks and universities that have a lot of immigrant students, George Mason University, for instance, had a mediation program on immigration issues to educate, not just educate, actually, to bring together people in the community to debate immigration policy. For instance, we had mediated discussions in our community between the Ku Klux Klan, Help Save Manassas, which was a very right-wing, let's deport everyone group, in a room with people like myself who, are all about equality, fairness, due process. Let's treat everyone equally. So those were very productive discussions, and the Brookings Institute was an organization that really helped bring some of those studies to light. So I believe some of the think tanks, Migration Policy Institute has done a lot of work, the Pew Hispanic Center has done a lot of work, National Immigration Project. I mean, if you just look up policy immigration on Google, you're going to come up with a ton of nonprofits. Whether any of them are really, taking the national forefront in terms of like congressional leadership, I don't know about that. But I know that in congressional hearings, a lot of their research is turned to, when you're creating legislation and policy. So I can't, not one person stands out in my mind as like the national spokesperson for fairness on immigration issues. I honestly can't really think of anyone right now. But there's a lot of excellent nonprofits and think tanks that have done great work on it. In terms of universal education, I'm not really sure how that fits into this question. So I guess I don't have a strong opinion on it, other than I believe that immigrant children, if the question is trying to drive at should immigrant children have entitlement to free education in the United States, I guess my just personal view would be yes, because they're here in this country, and if they are going to be remaining in the United States, we don't want to have generations of children growing up here that aren't educated and don't know how to function in our society, because chances are they're going to stay here anyways. So we might as well have an educated population regardless of their immigration status. And schools at the moment are not permitted, at least in Virginia. I don't know every single state, but in Virginia, they are not permitted to ask a student's education status or ask for a social security number or anything else that would indicate their legal status or their parents' legal status.
Excellent. No, thank you so much for addressing that. And let me now turn to Ilse's group number 3 for a question that they had. There are claims that President Obama has deported more undocumented immigrants than his predecessors, yet he has promised prosecutorial discretion in trying to deport immigrants with criminal backgrounds. What is the real situation on this? Let me repeat that.
No,
there are claims that you got it.
Yeah, I got it. That's a very good question. Obama has deported a tremendous number of people, almost 400,000 each year in the last couple of years. And so enforcement is very, very high and very strong right now. And ICE shifted its policy a couple of years ago to, we are going to exercise more prosecutorial discretion, which means that we're going to take a closer look at the priority of the cases that we deport. And at the same time, we're going to make a high priority criminal aliens. In practice, again, most of my cases are in Virginia, so I can most authoritatively speak about what's going on in the Metro DC, Virginia, Maryland area, where most of my cases are. But I think it's a good measure for the rest of the country. We have the Board of Immigration Appeals in our area. Our head office for ICE is in the Washington, D.C. area. So we have a lot of the national policy sort of in our backyard, if you will. Prosecutorial discretion is being exercised in a tremendous number of cases that I never would have dreamed would have been exercised a couple of years ago. Essentially, it's a catch and release program. It's like fishing, catch and release. They intersect with immigrants either because the local police pick them up for DUIs or driving without a license or drunk in public, or however the person comes into ICE custody. ICE reviews their case to see if they're a priority for removal. They, in many cases, will put the person into removal proceedings, but in the meantime, they'll let the person out and about on their own recognizance or on a GPS bracelet. And then when the case goes to court, the government trial attorney will review the case to see if it meets the ICE priorities, which are, is the person a danger to the community? Do they have a serious criminal record? DUIs are included in a serious criminal record. Do they have any way to legalize their status in the future? What are their family ties? What are their connection to children here? Do they pay their taxes? Are they a good person? Do we want this person to stay in the United States? And they balance the negative and positive equities, giving the most weight to prior immigration violations. Like, for instance, if someone has an order of deportation and then they re-entered the country illegally after an order of deportation, that would still be a high priority removal for ICE. So prior immigration violations that are serious, as well as a serious criminal record, those people are still looking at deportation likely. But if you don't have those things and you're just here undocumented for 10 years and you've got a family, then chances are good that you'll be able to stay. Interestingly, prosecutorial discretion has made it more difficult to get a green card through, for instance, cancellation of removal, which is similar to an exercise of prosecutorial discretion because prosecutorial discretion is being used so much. So now it's like plea bargaining. When you go to court, you're forced to choose between, do I go for the green card with cancellation of removal, and yet if I lose, my client's going to be deported, or do I essentially take a plea, which would be the prosecutorial discretion? The person does not get a green card. They do not get to stay here forever. They do not get a work permit in many instances. So they're just put right back into the pond in undocumented status where they were before. So Obama continues to deport high numbers of people, and yet there are so many people coming into the system that a tremendous number of people are also allowed to stay under prosecutorial discretion. So both are true.
Excellent. That's extremely helpful in answering the question. Let me now turn to another question by Ilse's group number 3. Are there enough jobs in the U.S. to support the number of illegal immigrants here if they were given citizenship? Let me repeat that. Are there enough jobs in the U.S. to support the number of illegal immigrants here if they were given citizenship?
I think this is a great question for like an economist or a policy person, but I believe I can address some of it just anecdotally from what I can see. My answer would be yes. And the reason I would say that is because again, Prince William, and you can Google Prince William County and find out what happened in our area, because we ourselves were a case study on immigration a couple of years ago and still are. When we lost a lot of our immigrants, buildings had for lease signs go up, businesses went out of business, our economy deteriorated. We had one of the highest foreclosure rates in the United States after 2008 when the housing boom crashed. And so our community was dramatically affected when the immigrant population essentially moved out overnight and are only just now coming back and bringing their business with them. So I sort of had a firsthand view of that. Also, immigrants create a lot of jobs. I mean, in our area, there are just tons of small businesses, landscaping companies, daycares, restaurants. You know, they create as many jobs as they take, and I still am a firm believer that without the immigrant population being here, there's a lot of jobs that just simply would not get done because no one else would do those jobs. And I'm really dead serious about that from what I can see.
Thank you. That's also very clarifying. Let me also now move to another question, Sarah's group number 4. Is it possible to raise the green card cap to lower the wait time for certain countries? Would there have been an alternate immigration policy that could have eliminated or prevented some of the backlog? Would it be possible with our current immigration system to reduce or eliminate backlogs?
Well, it's certainly possible, but that's all up to Congress. And Congress has decided that they don't want to raise the limits because they're not wanting to have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people immigrate to the United States. So this all comes down to congressional policy. Is it possible? Yes. Next year, Congress could act to say we're raising the number of visas in this category to X, and it would clear out, a large number of the wait line for a particular, category, whether it's family-based or work-based. In terms of countries, however, like the most oversubscribed countries are Mexico, Philippines, India, as an example. And, those countries just send a vast proportion more of immigrants. And so I'm not really sure if it would be fair to give them more visas or not. That is definitely a policy question I don't feel really able to address.
Let me turn to a different question that would be somewhat reliant on your legal expertise. Would it be possible, and this is a question from Sarah's group 4, would it be possible to provide legal assistance to unauthorized or undocumented immigrants? Could this reduce deportations?
It definitely would reduce deportations. People who face immigration court on their own, most of them take voluntary departure or take a deportation order. Asylum has statistics that are very clear and easily available, and I believe that if you do not have legal representation in an asylum case, you've got like about a 20% chance of winning and remaining in the United States. So immigration law is incredibly complex. I've been a securities lawyer, an intellectual property lawyer, a corporate lawyer. I've never practiced in an area as complex as immigration. I can barely keep up with it. And so to have an uneducated person facing the immigration system alone without legal representation, it's almost a sure ticket to deportation. Could we offer legal representation? We could. I don't know that there's the will to do that as a government paid program. Public defenders, that you do have a constitutional right to a criminal defense attorney if you cannot afford one. That's protected by the Constitution. Public defenders are short-staffed and are not getting paid what they need to, and they have huge caseloads. I don't see where the current funding is or the will to do it to fund free immigration defense. There's a lot of nonprofits that offer free immigration defense work, but they are also way oversubscribed, and a lot of them no longer take litigation cases because the litigation cases are so complicated. I think one step towards perhaps a system that would be government paid is when we begin to view deportation as a punishment. That's when we may be looking at a state paid for public defender system in the immigration system. But immigration law is civil, not criminal, and it's not regarded as a punishment. But the Supreme Court in Padilla versus Kentucky a couple years ago did recognize that in many instances deportation can be worse than serving a jail sentence, and that it can be akin to punishment. So if we continue to have a line of cases like that are recognizing deportation as a punishment, even though it's civil law, then you might begin to see discussion about, well, if it's like punishment, then these people need free legal representation, just like an indigent, person facing a criminal process would need representation.
Thank you, Lisa. That's extremely helpful. So let me just give you one more moment to add in any further commentary to add on to any of the answers you've given so far to the questions, these 8 last questions that we've just had, and then we can conclude this plenary. But we're very grateful for your taking the time out of your busy schedule to answer some questions from the technology community about immigration policy nationally.
Um, I would only add that immigration is just so incredibly nuanced. It is, as I mentioned, one of the most complicated areas of law ever. It's governed by multiple government agencies. Um, New case law obviously comes out every single day federally, as well as many state cases impact the interpretation of immigration law. Um, it overlays a criminal system, and so every time someone commits a crime who's anything but a U.S. citizen, you're always looking at both the state criminal code as well as the federal immigration law and how that interprets crimes. It's very high-powered emotional issues. People are dealing with their livelihoods. People in the United States who have grown up here maybe for 300 years, have their families here, they're dealing with their livelihoods and their culture as well. So it's incredibly complicated, incredibly nuanced, incredibly emotional, very personal, and it really raises so many discussion points that it's almost impossible to get your hands around. Like, I think about Congress passing a law like comprehensive immigration reform, and then I'm like, wow, I don't know how to really move forward or what the answer is on all of these issues. Like, just the 60,000 kids at the border. On the one hand, we should allow all those children to come in, give them asylum, give them the ability to have safe, secure lives. And on the other hand, there's so many other issues that come with allowing 60,000 kids to come into this country who are in need of services, support, may have follow-on immigration from their parents and their siblings and whatever, that I really don't think there's easy answers. And what I can say is that the work that this organization, Reframe It, is doing is just incredibly important, because the most critical thing that I believe can happen is that people are discussing the issues, that they're willing to do more homework and begin to understand the law and the social issues and the economic issues, and also the issues of how has the United States around the world contributed to the current imbalance that exists, such that we would have an inflow of immigration into this country like we've, are continuing to see. So your organization's incredibly valuable, and really the discussion is what is most important, because you need all parts to play into the solution on immigration issues.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's a perfect note to allow the small group discussions to return with their moderators to their Google Hangouts and conclude this afternoon with the final hour and 9 minutes of internal dialogue within the small group discussions, empowered by the answers to the questions that were shared by Lisa this afternoon, as well as the plenary from this morning. Participants, when you return to your small groups, you'll also be receiving the final survey link. This will be something that we're looking forward to receiving your considered opinions on immigration policy through your return of that. Your moderators will be able to coordinate with you on any other aspect of this. But again, we're grateful for your participation in this national online dialogue within the technology community, co-sponsored by Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Miami Community Foundation, Knight Foundation, TechCrunch, and Reframe It. Again, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. With that,
Thank
I'll
you.
wish you all farewell.